Hello, students. It's Professor Del Russo, and the next thing we're going to take a look at is Professor Poole's page 81. And if you recall, we're taking a look at the specific information that the team gathers during that pre-interview meeting. And Professor Poole at page 81 has a list of things that she considers important from her review of the research. And after that, we'll take a close look at the Child First Finding Words Forensic Interview Referral Sheet, or intake sheet. And that's the sheet that Child First uses in New Jersey to gather the kind of information that Poole talks about at page 81. It's a little bit different, and it may gather information that's slightly different from Professor Poole. So let's take a look first at the page 81 list from Professor Poole.
So Professor Poole starts her section on compiling background information by making the observation that this pre-interview preparation is desirable because it can give us some kind of head start on the child's level of functioning, what their schedule is like at home, whether they're likely to be tired or maybe need a break for medical reasons. The more you know about the child before the interview, you might be able to schedule a bilingual interviewer or maybe get a translator or interpreter. You might be able to recognize the names that the child may discuss during the interview. And of course, you can begin to think about your strategy, the kinds of script or strategy you might follow during the interview. So let's take a look at Professor Poole's bullet points. They're on the screen now. She breaks them into two sections, child information and circumstance information. Now, the child information includes the child's name, what they like to call themselves, how old they are, their gender identity, any developmental considerations, for example, developmental delays, hearing or speech impairment, and any mental health diagnoses. You remember from Professor Heath's podcast where we talked about interviewing kids with developmental disabilities? Well, preparation is key, right? We'd also want to know whether there were any medical treatments, whether the child has any medical issues. And if they do, what about medication? Are they on medication? Does the medication make them sleepy? Learn as much as you can about the child and any medical history. Maybe you need to schedule the interview at a different time. Of course, as we talked about in Learning Module 6, cultural considerations. What language the child speaks. What language the child speaks at home. What language they speak in school. You need to take a look at the family composition, the custody arrangements. Is it an intact family? Is it a family that's split up where the father lives one place, the mother lives another place? What kind of caregiving environment is there? What's the child's schedule? What time do the little ones take naps? I think you might want to know that. If the child takes a nap typically at 1 p.m., you don't want to interview that child at 1:45. The family names for the body parts are important for the investigators. What do they call their body parts? You'll see in the Child First Finding Words protocol that there is a section where the child names the different body parts. It's nice to know what they call the body parts ahead of that time within their family. And any relevant family routines or recent events that are important to the interview. So that's what Professor Poole calls the child information at page 81. The next section of background information that Professor Poole recommends gathering involves information about the circumstances of the offense. And you can see on the screen, she suggests learning about the general nature of the investigation. Was it physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect? What are some of the details? Did it happen once or more than once? Where did it happen? Here's a very critical piece of information. How did the allegation come to the attention of the authorities? When we studied Sorensen and Snow, remember, we looked at whether it was a purposeful disclosure or an accidental disclosure. Did the child go to an authority figure and say, something's happening, I'm being molested, I want help? Or did the mother find the child's diary and the child had never disclosed? Or the mother came in the room and looked at the child's cell phone or text messages? Accidental disclosures. Those things matter. any possible motivations to conceal or to distort the information? Were there threats? Is the perpetrator a batterer? Is there domestic violence in the house that might impact whether the child discloses or how the information might come out? For fully informed interviewing, Professor Poole suggests that the allegations and circumstances surrounding the allegations have to be examined. Was it touching by a babysitter or a parent? What was the relationship between the parties? That matters. We'll take a closer look at that in a moment when we look at the Child First Finding Words interview intake sheet. Okay, students, let's take a look at a Child First Finding Words referral form. This is the intake form that's filled out by the forensic interviewer. And typically the forensic interviewer will meet with the non-offending caregiver, usually the mother, maybe the grandmother, maybe some other guardian who brings the child to the advocacy center. And the purpose is to gather that information that we talked about, that Professor Poole outlined at page 81. And this is a mock form. The data in the form is made up, but the form itself is the actual form that's used, at least in Passaic County. So we're going to look at the form and the kind of information that's gathered and what it all means, why we gather it, those kinds of things. So you can see it's called a forensic interview intake form. It has a file number. It has the date of the interview, the name of the child, and the child's date of birth. An interesting question right here is, has the child or another family member been here in the past? And in this case, the answer is yes. And it indicates that you must put down the file number from the old case and a little bit of information about it. And you'll see the matter involved a sibling, and that case was closed because of insufficient evidence. And the father spent 1 day in jail. So that's important information, and you'll be glad that you develop that information later, because that could have an impact on whether that child wants to talk to you or not. It has the child's address, the city, the county, the phone numbers, who the caregiver is, what the relationship is. It happens to be the mother. Sometimes it's the grandmother. Sometimes it might be a foster mother. So you want to know who that is. If a child's in foster care, that's important. That means the child was separated from the family, and that could be a problem. That might make the child reticent or reluctant to talk to you. Who the father is, what the father's name is. Who are the child's siblings? Well, here we have Lucy Ho-Wan, Kyrie Ho-Wan, and Pat Ho-Wan Jr. Does the child have any developmental delays or disabilities? Important information. This particular child has dyslexia or difficulty reading. So you want to know that ahead of the interview. Maybe you won't have the child read things on the board or participate in any part of the interview that might involve reading or looking at words. You want to know that. You want to know the depth of the dyslexia, how impactful it is. So that's good information that we gather when we meet with the non-offending caregiver. Where was the child when she came to the center today? You know, the child may have lived with mom or mom and dad or some other place, but now where are they? Have they been moved by the Division of Youth and Family Services or DCP&P to some other location? Maybe they're with an aunt. Maybe they're with a foster family, like I suggested before. You want to know that. What kind of abuse is suspected? Well, this one's sexual because the word sexual is checked off. Who's the suspect? Well, the suspect here is the father. That's the kind of thing you want to know because you have to worry about loyalty. A child who is brought to the center, who may have been abused by their father or their stepfather, or someone they know, love, or trust, is less likely to be forthcoming with information. They're going to be reluctant to inform on their father. They don't want to see their father get in trouble sometimes. It all depends. And in this case, you may remember at the beginning of the interview, there was a prior investigation involving this child's sister. And what happened? Dad went to jail for a day. So that child knows by informing, Dad can go to jail. Not only because they may have figured that out on their own, but also because the last time it happened with her sister, that's exactly what happened. So you'd want to know that. You'd want to know going in that this child may be reluctant to talk to you because they're afraid of their father getting in trouble, and they don't want to be party to that. What is the suspect's access to the child? Well, the mother works from 11 to 9 a.m. She's probably an overnight nurse or something like that, and the father's temporarily disabled. So he's always around lately, and mom's not around at some key time periods. So that's something you need to know about because that is an issue of access and opportunity. When could these things have happened? Is the allegation plausible? Is dad able to complete the crime? Well, in this case, dad does have access and opportunity because mom's not around 11 to 9 p.m. Information gathering is critical. Information gathering. So, of course, you want a little bit of narrative, a little bit of information about how the information came out, how the child disclosed, who did she tell? Remember when we studied Sorensen and Snow, I mentioned it before. Was it an accidental disclosure or a purposeful disclosure? Obviously, a purposeful disclosure where the child goes to a grown-up or to an authority figure, to a teacher or a guidance counselor and says, hey, my grandpa's touching me or my daddy's touching me. That's a kid who's more likely to talk to you than someone who never made a statement, whose mother found text messages or a diary, or a child who was found to have gonorrhea or a sexually transmitted disease. That child may indeed be a victim, but they never told anybody. They never told anybody when it was happening, and they never told anybody at the time you did the interview. That child's going to be more difficult to interview. So let's see what the disclosure was in this case. The form was filled out and some basic information was learned. At 2:15 p.m., the alleged victim, the child in his case, told Jen Glover, an 8-year-old classmate at school 24, that her father's pee-pee smells funny. Jen asked, that is the little playmate asked the victim, the alleged victim, how do you know this? The alleged victim says, well, Dad lets me play with it when Mom is working. Jen then tells Mrs. O'Connor, and Mrs. O'Connor spoke briefly to the victim who denied ever talking to Jen about this. That's important. Mrs. O'Connor's someone at school, right? So the playmate tells a teacher or a guidance counselor or someone at the school, this Mrs. O'Connor person, and then when the victim is questioned by Mrs. O'Connor, she doesn't only deny that there's a molest or that her father's pee-pee smells funny, she denies that she even talked to Jen about something like that. That tells me this interview is going to be tough. The victim then goes to the principal's office. Principal Guerreri did not speak to the child, but the principal called Child Protection, DCP&P or DYFS. Here's the thing about principal offices, though. Even though the principal didn't talk to her and didn't question her, she still was brought there. When we were kids, we didn't want to go to the principal's office, did we? No. Because if you were called to the principal's office, you did something bad. And maybe this victim thinks they're in trouble or they did something bad. The last place a kid wants to go to in most cases is the principal's office. So that's something else that suggests this kid's going to be a very tough interview. Well, DYFS did not go on the day of disclosure and instead set up the appointment for the interview that's about to happen after this referral form is filled out. The suspect wasn't around, so DYFS decided to wait a little bit because they were busy. Well, the interview's about to begin, and who's there? The local police department, the Killington PD, someone from the prosecutor's office, and the child's mother. They're all at the Child Advocacy Center. Now, the mother was told about the allegations the night before, and she brought the child to Trenton because Child Protection told her that the father would not be able to have contact when he returns from the hospital. So apparently dad was at the hospital for some reason. Now, the kid goes to Trenton. Again, this is a tough interview because you got everything going bad for you. The child is taken from her home and temporarily placed, probably with relatives, I'm not sure, but she's not in a family home anymore. The mother chose to have dad come home and send the child to Trenton. And I think Trenton is mentioned somewhere up top here. Yes, see up here it says the child is at the apartment of the paternal grandparents. So the child had to go stay with her grandma and grandpa, and it's the father's grandma and grandpa. And that's not a good scene either. So these are all things that you learn ahead of the interview. And they're important things, really important things. This is just an empty interview form. So you see how gathering that information lets us know things about the child, about their level of functioning, about prior molests in the family, about the suspect's access to the child, and most importantly, is this child going to communicate with us? Are they going to talk about what may have happened? And in this case, it's going to be very difficult. Let me take a look at what the child's age is. 7. That's actually a good thing. At least that's in your favor, right? It's not a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old who can be very combative sometimes, these teenagers. It's a 7-year-old. That's the sweet spot for kids who are going to be interviewed. So you have a child who can express themselves, they're verbal, they have enough understanding and enough innocence that juries like them, they're believable. So the issue in this case is not developmental immaturity. The issues here are the child's emotional response and the child's beliefs about the impact of what they might say or what the impact is already because they're at their grandparents' house. So all of this stuff matters, and that's why preparation, compiling background information is vital. And that's why Professor Poole talks about it. That's why I tell you it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. That's why I don't believe in the blind interview. That's why I believe in the informed interview. The informed interview.